Wrongful detention of American citizens abroad has become a news spectacle with recent coverage of Trevor Reed, Paul Whelan, Brittney Griner, and Evan Gershkovich detained in Russia. Wrongful detention of Americans is certainly concerning, but is it always wrongful, or is it particularly outrageous when it occurs in Russia? A timely question to explore. Regretfully, U.S. government does not readily share information on international detentions. And there are some good reasons for such secrecy. However, the same approach does not appear to have consistency across detainees and across offending nations. Vocal outrage and public scrutiny is targeting selective offenders with much political coloring. I found a good source of information on James Foley Legacy Foundation site. This foundation advocates for freedom of all U.S. nationals wrongfully detained or held hostage abroad. Per James Foley Foundation, at least 54 Americans are currently being held abroad. Over the past decade, the number of U.S. nationals that are designated wrongfully detained has steadily increased, as well as the number of countries engaging in detention of U.S. nationals is significantly increasing. In early 200s, only 4 countries were accused of wrongfully detaining U.S. nationals. In 2022, the count was at least 19 countries. Overall, since 2001, at least 27 countries have been linked with wrongful detention of U.S. nationals. If we look at the breakdown of countries with detained U.S. nationals, you see the top offenders. There are Iran, Egypt, China, Venezuela, and so on. Russia is closer to the end of this list. But yet, all we tend to hear about is outrage over Russia. Why is it that Russia gets such center stage for any negative press opportunities? Blame the Russians seems to be the slogan. They're always the go-to target for being the villains. But are they really? Perhaps we're significantly over-indexed on blaming Russia. The selective interest has certainly put the spotlight on recently detained Americans there. The 4 Americans deemed wrongfully detained are Trevor Reed, Paul Whelan, Brittney Griner, and Evan Gershkovich. The story of each offers an interesting element to the overall picture. Let's start with Trevor Reed, a former Marine arrested for assaulting 2 Russian police officers in 2019. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison in 2020 and returned to the U.S. in 2022 as part of a prisoner swap in exchange for Konstantin Yaroshenko, an alleged Russian smuggler convicted of conspiring to import cocaine. The incident leading to Trevor's arrest is classic. He was heavily drunk to the point of being left to recover by his friends and girlfriend. It's not a stretch to imagine a drunk Marine acting like a hothead and not respecting authorities. And the police arresting a drunk for rough behavior is quite basic. So was he really wrongfully detained? I personally doubt it. On the other hand, consider the exchanged American prisoner, Konstantin Yaroshenko, a pilot serving a whopping 20-year sentence in the U.S. for an alleged drug smuggling plot to destinations in South America, Africa, and Europe. He was arrested in Liberia in May 2010 and brought to the U.S. as some of the drugs were allegedly slated to the U.S. He had not actually shipped any cocaine before his arrest. Essentially, U.S. Secret Service kidnapped Yaroshenko as they violated the 1963 Vienna Convention on Consular Relations and the Bilateral Consular Convention requiring notifications of arrest of participating countries in third countries. Even though the U.S. Department of State eventually apologized, citing a technical slip, they didn't release the Russian prisoner. Requests by Russian Ministry of Justice to extradite Yaroshenko based on 1983 Council of Europe Convention were denied, When new evidence emerged of Yaroshenko's innocence, he was denied a retrial. Also noteworthy are some things that didn't make it into the mainstream media, such as Yaroshenko's complaints of torture by Liberian authorities and DEA, and his treatment in American prison facilities, where he was repeatedly placed in punishment cells without explanation. Yaroshenko's serious health problems were also of no essence, while fragile health of Trevor Reed, per his parents, was enough to make the news. Russian prison conditions, however, are always scrutinized, even though I bet they treat their native citizens more harshly. Next, let's look at Paul Whelan, another former Marine, detained in December 2018 in Moscow on espionage charges for having been found with a list of employees from a classified security agency. He was designated wrongfully detained on April 7, 2022, more than 3 years after he was arrested. There was no official announcement. His family received a letter from U.S. government. That's it. Recently, however, there has been resurrected interest in Whelan, seemingly to support the argument against Russia. But not too much emphasis is taking traction, as his past history is not very glamorous. Maybe U.S. can't stand too firmly against his wrongful detention accusation. A bit on Whelan's character. His personal account of his police roles does not coincide with police department's record where he worked. He collected U.S., UK, Canadian, and Irish citizenships, which may be irrelevant but still interesting. And undeniably relevant is that he was convicted on an impressively long list of charges and embarrassingly kicked out of the Marines with a bad conduct discharge. I'd argue that just because one of his citizenships happens to be American, it shouldn't spin our government to secure his release. So why make such a fuss about this sketchy individual? Well, there's a long list of Americans in detention, wrongfully detained in many other countries. I suspect it's because we're still talking about Russia. Next, the beloved Brittney Griner, arrested in Moscow on drug smuggling charges for carrying hash oil, which is illegal in Russia, and quite ironically, illegal on the federal level in the United States as well. Griner, however, is politically inappropriate to criticize due to her being black and gay, and her WNBA star status is certainly an extra benefit, as money and celebrity status seem to buy quite a lot these days. Griner was arrested in February 2022 and was declared wrongfully detained rather quickly, within 3 months, and subsequently returned to the U.S. via prisoner swap in exchange for a Russian arms dealer, Viktor Bout, called by U.S. prosecutors one of the world's most successful and sophisticated arms traffickers. He earned the nickname the Merchant of Death. That's who Griner was traded for. Wrongful detention for Griner is probably the most laughable. It was clearly the typical knee-jerk reaction by U.S. government we've come to expect. Griner broke Russian law, and U.S. should have no business chastising Russia on this matter, particularly when the same types of laws exist right here at home. Reality is that Russia may have some of the most restrictive laws on cannabis, expanding to use, possession, sale, transport, cultivation, and transportation. Penalties range from monetary fines to 15 years in prison. So while 9 years that Brittney Griner got sound harsh, it's within the norm in Russia. And let's not miss the hypocrisy, as in the US, over 7 million people were arrested for possession of marijuana between 2001 and 2010. Per Opus Health, just in 2021, over 1 million people were incarcerated in US for marijuana, with most for simple possession. So no need to be outraged with Russia's arrest, but maybe instead redirect the anger to help abolish similar discriminatory laws right here at home. Now, regarding details on Griner's arrest, I personally don't find it hard to believe that a drug-sniffing dog in the Moscow airport would pick up the telltale smell of cannabis that may have even extended beyond Griner's bags. They're on alert there, and for many good reasons, and I can relate from a very personal experience as I had been detained in the same Moscow airport years back. It was a very unpleasant experience to say the least. But in the end, I feel that while I was treated firmly, there was a human element to it. I respect that. Perhaps US should allow other countries to exercise their laws without interference and handle political matters professionally, not as a reality TV show blasted in the media, and fix domestic inequalities before having the nerve to discipline others. Hypocrisy is not becoming. Last subject, Evan Gershkovich, a Wall Street Journal reporter detained on espionage charges by Russia's security service FSB for trying to obtain state secrets. He was detained on March 30th, 2023, and formally declared wrongfully detained only 8 days after getting arrested. And while US government vehemently denies his charge, it's starting to sound like the boy that cried wolf fable. And does Russia have no right to hold Gershkovich just because US said so? And now a new resolution has come into play, calling on Russian government to release immediately Gershkovich as well as other Americans labeled wrongfully detained. What about the rest of Americans detained in the other 18 countries? Wrongful detention has become yet another tool for US to vilify Russia in the long-standing effort to destabilize the country. The persistent approach of ultimatums, lies, and blatant hypocrisy is reckless and unrespectable. US should be looking for common ground and establishing constructive relations across countries, not excavating for enemies. US should be solving for peace, not instigating violence. Making the spectacle of wrongful detentions can only foster an environment for hostage diplomacy across the globe, and more countries may want to target US nationals for political leverage. A terrible outcome. And as we want respect for our laws and customs, let's give the same respect to others. There's no grace in unbalanced criticism and judgment, only division and escalation. Thank you for listening to my take. Please take a moment to subscribe to my channel and like the video. Subscribing does not imply you agree with my opinion. It just means you support me in expressing mine, even if it's not mainstream. So please click the subscribe button. And if you have a reflection to voice, post a comment. Constructive dialogue on a difficult topic is very important. До свидания.